Good morning, friends. It's Tuesday, the 20th of Cheshvan. It is the 26th of October. Today is actually in the Chabad calendar a notable day. It is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dober. So if you know a Chabad rabbi with that name, it's quite plausibly named for the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dober. Shneir's in the fifth Chabad Rebbe of blessed memory. And so that is that. We're studying the Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Mesechet Shabbat, chapter 9, page 84a. Actually, the last two lines on 83b, 84a. We were talking broadly about a Mishnah that mentions the source that a boat cannot receive ritual impurity, because the Mishnah quotes a verse that says that the boat is in the sea. It's obvious, and it teaches us that the halachic status of the boat is like a sea. There's an alternate source from the verse that we reviewed yesterday in Vayikra, Vayisak, Vayibeged, Kliar, that all these different materials are different kinds of vessels that are made of wood, or sack of leather, etc. And so the Mishnah teaches us that we can apply the facts of sack to wood, just like a bag is able to carry, or be carried rather, both when it is empty and full. The same thing applies to all wooden vessels, to the exclusion of a boat, which is not really easily carried when it's very heavy. The Gemara asked my Beinayon, we brought some possibilities. Maybe it isn't made of wood, or maybe the boat is actually able to be carried because it is quite a small. Check if it was, I think it was entered. Or if it's a small boat that's able to be carried. We called it a Jordan River canoe or small boat. And that was that. Then the Gemara said that there was an explanation presented about why a small boat might be a problem. It had to do with the size and the ability to carry it. And then we had the exclamation of Rabbi Yehuda Marav saying that you really need to always be present, because you never know. You might miss an important and very interesting factoid, something that maybe for a long time you didn't know, and being there at that moment allowed him to glean that insight. And so that was where we left off, and we're going to have one or two other small anecdotes along those lines, and then we'll go back into the discussion of boats and their ritual impurity. Let's share the screen and jump right in. So here we are. No? I guess we're not here. Find the place. 83b, last two lines. Here we go. We'll just recap again. Omar. Well, we'll go back to the halacha too. Why can a Jordan riverboat become impure? It is small and light and can be carried, and therefore it has that feature that's similar to a sack, that it can be carried full and empty, and therefore it's richly impure. Rabbi Yehuda Marav exclaimed after hearing this, a person should not make themselves scarce in the study hall, even for a small moment. It's been long that I've known and studied this Mishnah. But this explanation of Rabbi Chanina ben Akavia is a chiddush. It's insightful. It answers a question or a doubt, and could have been missed had he not been in the base medrash at that moment. Rashi, and we pointed out yesterday, as Rashi points out, it's a teaching on the subject of Meseches Kelim. Meseches Kelim, about the ritual impurity of different vessels, and here he got the answer. Along the same lines, Rabbi Yochanan similarly taught. A person should not be found in the Beis HaMedrash, and a person shouldn't hold himself back from Torah study. Afilu b'shas misa, even in a person's final moments. Shenemar zois haTorah adam ki yamos ba'ohel. The Torah, talking about the laws of ritual impurity, says these are the laws of what happens if a person passes in a tent. But there is an Agadic drush that interprets it as follows: a person, even kiyamos ba'oil, upon their death, they should also be in the environment of Torah. We'll take a look and see what that might mean. Afilu b'shas misa, a person should try to always be consumed with Torah, even in his final moments. Let's take a peek at so the Chidush Agada says, first of all, it's going to be hard for a person to be present in their final moments, especially if it comes from illness or old or advanced deterioration. It might be hard to be in a base medrash, but it means that a person should try to be surrounded by words of Torah even when they're in a weakened state, and even though it is challenging. Ben Yoyada asks a similar question in different words. Are we saying really a person should be rushed, should hire or call an ambulance, God forbid, in the final moments and have them brought to the base medrash? That doesn't have the ring of appropriateness. It doesn't sound like it's something that can be done or should be done. Please help me figure this out. What would this look like? Marsha Zalkasav, he quotes the Marsha that we just referenced. So like that we're only talking about studying Torah. The person should try to be surrounded by words of Torah in their final moments. This runs contrary to the simple reading of our Gemara, which says Al Yimna Adamas Asmai Mi Beis HaMedrash Umi Divrei Saira Afilu B'Shas Misa. The way you'd have to read it is you should always be you should always be in the Beis Medrash, you should always study Torah. And even when a person is passing, they should study Torah. That doesn't sound like what the Talmud is saying. Similarly, to expect the person in their final moments to be involved in Torah, that's also not so easy. Not everyone, most people, unfortunately, don't have the clarity of mind and aren't always in a lucid state in their final moments. And there are many other thoughts and emotions if they are clear. What are the odds? How is it possible? It's not a fair expectation that a person should literally depart from this world with words of Torah. Some very special individuals, so we have unique individuals who did. But this is not a universal expectation. And how could we say this is something we expect from everyone? And so the Ben Yoyada is going to give this Gemara an interpretation that's going to make us feel a lot more related. It's going to feel a lot more relatable, and it's going to make it much more something that we can all aspire to. When it says death, it doesn't mean death. We mean painful moments, moments of difficulty, different kinds of challenges that a person encounters that feel in the moment like death itself, illness, poverty, struggle, blindness. The Talmud, the Gemara Jewish teaching says a person that, God forbid, has dimmed eyesight, that could be to a person a very, very distressing experience, and it's sometimes called chashav kemes. Illness is described, especially he says saras. Other maladies are called like death, and poverty as well is compared to death. And indeed, the aspect of poverty is like death is well known to many, because we have a story in Parshas. What is it? In Toldus? Is it this week's Parsha? Next week's Parsha. Toldus. It talks about how Yaakov is on the run from his brother, and we describe how he's entirely impoverished, and the famous explanation that he was chased down by his brother in the Medrashim, and the Gemara is chased down by Eliphaz, his nephew, who said, "My father sent me to kill you, but I don't want to kill you, so what do we do?" And he says, "Take all my stuff. Ani nechshav kemes, ani chashav kemes." Rashi brings that. And so three things that, God forbid, a person should encounter are quite challenging. And it's hard for a person to focus when they're struggling with poverty or illness or visual impairment. And our Gemara is teaching us, even if a person is dealing with great difficulty, a person should yet endeavor to keep themselves surrounded by the words of Torah.
Rabbi?
Yes, Alan.
Before you mentioned that a person shouldn't die and shouldn't pass away in the Beis Midrash, it reminds me of the story of David HaMelech. when the angels played a trick on him.
Yes. Yes. Alan,
And
you know where
they-
we learned that Gemara?
No,
In our studies. It came up in our Gemara. That yes, David HaMelech was studying Torah to the point where they were unable to get him, and so there was some kind of tree or some kind of noise.
Tree
He came outside
fell,
to inspect, and he tumbled, and it was in the context of Shabbos and Muksa, and I think it was in Brachas too. Anyways, shkoyach for bringing that up, absolutely. But not everyone is Zoiche, David HaMelech, Shem Bar Yochai. But I think the Ben Yehoyada makes it a very beautiful and relatable. Not relatable. Everyone's had a moment of difficulty or pain or discomfort, or the stock or their portfolio fluctuated, and they felt like, oh no, how's it going to work? Well, we're told even when we're going through those moments, for a Jew, the greatest solace and strength and blessing we could do is hold on to Torah, and that's what's so special about the holy members of this Chabur. Now let's see, the Gemara is going to give us one more line along the same lines. Reish Lakish said this verse teaches us something a little different. Who is a person who's truly going to be who is a person that his Torah is really going to endure? A person who kills themselves, not literally, but figuratively. Like we might say in English, a person killed himself to get a project done. So that's actually an expression that exists in the Talmud. A person who kills himself, who pushes himself to the point of exhaustion. As the pasuk says, this is the Torah Adam Kiyamos Ba'al, person who dies in the tent. In a midrashic interpretation, Zois HaTorah, you want the Torah Adam Kiyamos Ba'al, it'll be acquired by a person who kills themselves to study Torah. And the same Ben Yehoyada comments and reminds us of an interesting Gemara. The Talmud says a very puzzling statement. A person who wants to live should die. What it means is a person who really wants to live on should weaken themselves and put themselves, embrace difficulty, embrace pain. And similarly in Pirkei Avos it says, a person that wants to excel in Torah needs to live a modest, impoverished lifestyle. A person is pursuing every perk and pleasure, they won't have enough time to focus exclusively on Torah study. Anyway, so that's what he says. So he connects that to this one. Amarava. Okay, we can pause here. So this is essentially a series of 3 teachings about how based on the pasuk Adam Kiyamos Ba'al, about the importance of always being present in the base measures, always trying to study even when there are difficult times, and a true Torah acquisition comes when a person devotes themselves to the point of discomfort and real effort, and that's what our Gemara is teaching us. And now, in the next moment, when we turn the page, we're also going to continue our discussion about purity of both. So I just want to pause if anyone has any additional comments, thoughts, perspectives. Now would be a wonderful time to consider sharing them.
Rabbi, the language of this is a little, I would say, disturbing to me in a certain way.
Okay.
It suggests, like total immersion, whether in the base medrash or learning Torah, and almost to the point of being an obsession and disregarding anything else in the world and life and your family in anything that go learn more, spend more time, spend more. I'm just saying, there's no, even in the Meforshah, I didn't see anything that suggests how important it is, but there are other things that where time has to be made for you to deal with the reality of either being a parent or we won't go to earning a living. That's a delicate.
And the Pirkei Avos says Torah im derech eretz, that
right.
Torah has to be, and we read that in our not long ago in our Gemara, that there has to be either Parnasa, which is the common interpretation, or other menschlichkeit. So I would just say like this: it's true. Torah wants us to care for our physical well-being and to care for our families and to be present. And And as a matter of fact, one of the important mitzvahs of Talmud Torah is a father, a parent instructing their children. And so if you're unavailable for your children, you can't be involved in that very essential thing. So I want to add 2 points. Point number one is, and the Rebbe would frequently teach this, so it's something that I'm familiar with, that we say that a person has to have kiviut itim la Torah, a person has to have set times for Torah. But if you look in the Hilchos Talmud Torah, it says really a person should v'gisa bo yom v'layla, a person should learn Torah all day and all night. But not everyone is able to, so a person should learn to the best of their ability. And then the Rebbe would always explain that kiviut means to establish, to make something permanent. But kiviyut could either be a time that you're constantly plugged in, or it could be a soul devotion. Kiviyus benefesh. You make sure that it's attached to your soul, that the moments that you learn, you're utterly devoted, you're singularly focused in that moment on Torah study. So there are people who should literally devote their entire existence to Torah study, just like you have professors that devote their entire study to academia, and you have researchers who devote their entire life to research. So we certainly want to have people that are that passionate about Torah. But for most people that are not able to literally, abandon everything else in the world for Torah, at least we should try to have times that we're singularly focused on that. And I would say that the people that are in this chabura that make the effort day in and day out certainly get the credit for the kiviyas benefesh to have an utter devotion. And so I'm not trying to discourage anyone from being even more dedicated, but your point and the context is absolutely true and well taken and accessible and appropriate within the Jewish Torah perspective.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that it was Luzzatto who discussed this issue, and he came to the explanation that those appeals like that we are studying now are made to people at a higher spiritual level, which is not really accessible to everyone. And one has to learn his own spiritual level and learn to live with that. Like he tells about the story of a person who didn't try to earn a living, hoping that Hashem will provide. And Hashem hasn't provided. So he complained, how come I followed the teaching and the result was so negative? And he explains that means that his spiritual level wasn't sufficient, but there is nothing to really be upset about. There are 36 saint people in the world, and the rest of us are at a less spiritual level.
Yes, so the Gemara, I believe that we study when we study the segment on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So he would say that a person should make Torato and Munato, that the Torah should be his umanut, it should be his expert profession, and all of his agricultural needs are done by others. All his work is done by others. And the Gemara comments, this is Harbo also, many people attempted, Veloy also be other, and it didn't work out. And so there are different strokes for different folks. There are different roles for different people to play. And I think academia and research are good examples. You have some people that really are devoted to the exclusion of any kind of social or any other hobbies or family. There are some people that live with that degree of devotion, but that's not necessarily, it is necessarily not the pathway for everyone. And I think that's where we kind of balance out the different teachings.
Rabbi.
However, I think we could say that this teaching is addressed to those who want to really become entirely consumed with Torah and make it their life's mission. Well, if you want to make Torah your life mission, if you want to be one of the doctor you said and professor you said is 36, if you want to be one of those pillars that are the core people transmitting Torah, especially in a time where it was an oral tradition, well then yes, those people, if you want to take on the mantle of that role, well then you do need to be utterly devoted. And the Talmud talks about the rare occasion where you had Ben Azai who wasn't married, right? Or they couldn't bear even so that's for one person that anyone could mention from the Talmud. That's not for every single individual.
Rabbi, recently in Israel, there was a demonstration for Agunot. And the yeshiva boys, I think it was Rav Kook's yeshiva, asked the Rosh Yeshiva if they should go to the demonstration. And he said, if you don't know when to close the book, you shouldn't even open the book.
Yeah, so that's a strong teaching. And
It's part of Torah to do these things as well.
yeah,
Well, I'll tell you, in the Haredi community in Israel, since there's always been criticism of the Haredi community, the fact that they don't go to the army. So the classic answer that's given is that they're killing themselves in the tent of Torah. That line specifically is what they use as a clarification of why they feel they don't need to go to the army.
yeah. I don't feel qualified to but yes, that's certainly
I'm
an
just
issue.
making a statement. I'm not
Absolutely.
going one way or the other.
Absolutely. So I think so anyways, my sense is that it is correct for some, but certainly not a cookie cutter expectation for every person. And on the contrary, as the Gemara with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says. So, all right, now let's kill ourselves over some more Talmud. Amar Rava. I'm not sure. I think it actually has a better ring in the original Hebrew or the Talmud than saying it in English. But anyways, Amar Rava. So Rava goes back to our discussion. Ulechananya. Remember, Hanania is the one who taught that a Jordan River boat, is susceptible to ritual impurity because it's carried both full and empty. Now, hold on one second. Now we're going to need to dig deep and discuss how are those Jordanian rivers, Jordan boats carried. Lechananya, when Hanania is who says that a boat that is carried is susceptible to ritual impurity, what does it mean a boat that's carried? These boats are not that light. They're not exactly like a canoe or a kayak, right? If you're a kayak, you could carry a kayak. You can carry maybe a canoe if you're very strong, 1 or 2 people. These boats are not quite that small. They are schlepped by oxen. Tiltul ayidei shvarim shmei tiltul is the schlepping of these boats with pack animals with heavy heavy. Is that considered tiltul? Rashi. Hananya, who's of the opinion that a boat that is carried, Malaya Tameya, Afilu Eina Mitaltelas, Elai Shvarim, even though it is not really carried by hand, it's carried by animal, because it's quite heavy, and you need these strong, heavy machinery. Today, you need a truck. Is that really considered carrying, that it should be ritually impure? And the Gemara says yes. Actually, when the pasuk compares kli eitz to a beged, a sack, and we apply the principles of a sack that carries stuff and it can be carried when full or empty, and we say that other wooden vessels that are used to carry stuff can become ritually impure. Carrying can even include schlepping by vehicle or animal. It's not. There is such a Mishnah that says Shalosh Agalois Hey. This is again in a citation from the Gemara, from the Mishnah, that talks about kalim, vessels, and when they are or aren't susceptible to ritual impurity. And we're going to use Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation very carefully. Shalosh agalotain. There are 3 types of wagons that have different halachic rules in regards to ritual impurity. Asuya ki katedra. If it's created like a katedra, like a chair, Tameya midras, it is susceptible to ritual impurity when something goes on upon it, even if it's not immediately touched, but it's with something in between it, as we discussed previously. By touching, or by making some kind of contact. Literally, midras means to step upon or tread. Rashi, I think it's kind of like more of a ceremonial kind of wagon that you might imagine a for an ancient dignitary writing. Kimita, if the wagon is formed like a bed, tmeya tmemes, then it is susceptible to the impurity of a mess. Shalavonim, and if it's made out of stone, tahar miklum, it's entirely ritually pure. Let's read over Steinsaltz. In terms of the halachas of ritual impurity, there are three kinds of wagons. A wagon like a chair, closed on the sides, can be ritually impure with impurity imparted by treading. Since it was designed for sitting, it becomes impure if a zav sits on it, even if he doesn't touch it. As we discussed, there may be some kind of padding or something in between. A wagon built like a bed can become ritually impure with impurity imparted by a corpse, by a mess. In other words, it contracts all types of impurity except for impurity that is imparted by a zav by treading without direct contact. A stone wagon is entirely protected from ritual impurity. Let's read some more Rashis now. Kimita, what does it mean that a wagon is shaped like a bed? Shiarucha, it's long. Umitachtea mekabeles. Kimita shalar she'ein ba shum nekef. It's a solid. It has a solid flat bed wagon because it is able to receive. It's meant to carry stuff, but it is not meant for human sitting. Rashi, mikabel shar tumas kol chutz mitumas midras. The kli have a lekabel tuma. It's not meant for sitting. It's meant as a flatbed truck. It's used to carry merchandise. And the reason why we use tuma mace is just to teach us that it is openly susceptible to ritual impurity. But if it's made shalavonim, and I think I might have mistranslated, I said if it's made of stone, but here Rashi says it's made to carry stones. Let's read. Although Rish Steinsaltz doesn't translate. A wagon made of stone. And Rashi says, or it's meant to carry stones. Tahar miklum. Rashi. Rashi says that its bottom is porous. To carry big stones, you don't need a solid flat bed because the big boulders are not going to fall through. And so Rashi understands that it's designed in such a manner that can only capture large boulders. It does not actually, it's not considered a conventional receptacle. And they keli, to be a vessel, to be susceptible to ritual impurity, it needs to be whole. Rish Steinsaltz presents this Mishnah with a different interpretation than Rashi, but let's stick with Rashi for the moment. Okay, so here, let's back up a moment. We asked the question, does Hananya believe that an item that's dragged by animals is considered still like it's carried and susceptible to ritual impurity? And the Mishnah is quoted showing us that wagons that are not carried by man, they're dragged by an animal, and it is yet considered tiltal, it is susceptible to ritual impurity, proving Hananiah's point, or proving the Gemara's point and Hananiah's point. Rabbi Yochanan added in the regards to the wagon for stones, Yeshba, Lace, Kibul Remoinim, if it has the ability to hold items the size of a pomegranate or smaller, then Tmeya Tmemes, then that wagon, because it's closed and is able to carry stuff, it is susceptible to ritual impurity. Let's read Rashi. Alma, we see Apalgav Dishal Eitz, although the wagon is made of wood, is kash lesak, it is yet compared to our sack. The be'inon metalton moliverekan, it needs to actually be able to carry stuff. Vizu ene metateles el de alidei shivarim kamer tmei tmeis. And these wagons are not carried by humans; they're carried by animals. And therefore, we have proved that animals carrying something is considered mitaltel, that it's portable and carried, and it's susceptible to ritual impurity. Now we're going to spend some time learning an additional Mishnah in Kelim. So again, it's not the immediate subject of our Gemara, but it is introduced because it is related. And let's go through this slowly and carefully. Any comments or questions before we proceed?
What's the law against swimming on Shabbos? Is it the displacement of water?
Do you mind if I punt on that?
Yeah, we spoke about
Because
it.
it's a little, we talked about it extensively earlier on. There's a lot to discuss on the matter.
Because
Talk
I was
about it. Do you
just
remember?
thinking that a ship going through the water, whether
Ah.
it's on the ocean or anywhere, is displacing water too.
Okay, good question. I'm sorry. I didn't see the connection, but now I see the connection justifies the question. I'm still going to punt on it, but suffice it to say, the issue of swimming is not simply the displacement of water. We'll revisit it, but it was an entire section of the Gemara. I don't know if you recall, we distinguished between a pool, an open body of water, and other malachas that may ensue while you're swimming. It was when we were talking, remember we were talking about mikvah, going to a pool.
Right, right.
Right, so good question. Suffice it to say, one shouldn't be operating a boat on Shabbos. The question, right? The question that remains is if you're already on a boat for a few days, and that was another discussion that we've had. But suffice it to say, for a variety of reasons, we shouldn't be operating a boat on Shabbos. But I want to remind you that we are not presently talking about Shabbos. We are on a slight detour. We're talking about the susceptibility to ritual impurity. Right, again, right in the Torah time, in the Mishnah, Gemara, in the Temple times, there was a very important emphasis on ritual purity and impurity, because there were certain parts of Jewish life that were exclusively available when a person was ritually pure, namely partaking of temple rituals and other foods and other substances that were associated with sanctity, with holiness. And so Jews, even non-Kohanim, were very mindful of purity. A Kohen had an additional reason to be mindful of purity, and that's, of course, the avoidance of coming in contact with a corpse.
Rabbi.
And so that's essentially our discussion. And the question is, can your boat become a problem for example, for transporting truma? So Alan, you're anxiously awaiting your next load of truma because you're a Kohen. And the truma is the share of the crops that was gifted, biblically mandated to be gifted to the Kohen. And you're anxiously waiting, and it arrives on a ship. Alan, do you need to consider the possibility that your truma was contaminated by a ship? And our Mishnah here is saying, while you do need to consider that it may have been contaminated, the ship is not going to be the culprit because it's not susceptible to ritual impurity. However, according to Hananya, a boat that traverses the Jordan and is used and carried while transported while the wares are in it, well, then that's something that you do need to be mindful, Rabbi Alan, as a Kohen, even in temple times. In today's day and age, unfortunately, Alan, you and I, as Kohanim, we don't receive Truma. Our dear Levi doesn't receive Maser, to the best of my knowledge. But maybe he does. There's some backdoor.
Yeah. Have a Rabbi.
Go ahead. Yes.
The Levi needs a chair to lift him up to his floor at Lamer.
That's right. Unfortunately, there are people who have chairs who can't move when the elevator is not working. Anyway,
Yeah.
Rabbi, may I ask another question? You might
Yes.
want to punt on it. It's the question I had before that I'm unclear and uncomfortable with. It has to do with Zav and Nida and transmitting ritual impurity. Number one, is there a measure for either one of those, the way we measure other things? And number two, who knows? Does the person, in other words, it's not exactly Kavanah, but a person might be in one of those categories and not aware of it. So
great
Yeah.
question.
Right.
First of all, there are measures. It's the slightest amount. The size it's brought chardal. I think with me, that even the slightest measure could, if it's the right type of emission.
Okay, well,
Both male and female, it's even the slightest amount. Now, as far as what if you don't know? I don't want to go through the whole question, but it's a very good question. There's vast discussions about if a person discovers that they are male and female, they discover they are ritually impure, how far back do they need to retrace their steps and presume things they interacted with may or may not be considered ritually impure? Or is it only going forward? Is there a certain formula? Do you have to go back to the last time a person might have checked? So I'm not giving you an answer, but suffice it to say, it's a question that is discussed extensively. And again, because as much as it's hard for us to imagine a world that's consumed much with ritual purity, because it's not in our world, once upon a time, it was a matter of great importance to Jewish people
Rabbi.
who were adhering to these laws. Yes, Rabbi?
Rabbi, Bernie, this goes back a long time because there's a famous story about the Rambam. They sent him a letter from, I don't know, from Syria, wherever, all the way to Egypt, about someone who they found out after they gave him an aliyah had an emission. And the Rambam's answer is fantastic. The Rambam, after all these weeks, sends back an answer, don't send me asinine questions. You have that approach even then. You can't drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. So what do I want to tell you? No, yeah, so that is that.
Not for now, but it's an interesting issue, particularly among adolescent male yeshiva students.
Well, it's really, yeah. Well, it's a slightly different issue, but I understand that.
Right. No,
Yeah.
I'm just connected.
Yes. Absolutely. And just to point out that Tuman Torah was so central to temple times that we've said this in the past, but archaeologists can many times identify a Jewish settlement based on the kalim that they had, because there were certain kalim that were considered not susceptible to ritual impurity, and they were prevalent. They were prevalent or in use in order to avoid some of the concerns. And so archaeologists today, generally, one of the tools that archaeologists use in every dig in most regions of the world and in different strata is they look at the vessels. The most likely thing they had left over from people or from societies were their kalim, right? Everybody had some kind of pot and pan and plate or whatever, or jugs. And that's one of the most central, the things that survive and central to identifying. And there are all these different kalim that are usually a strong determination that it's a Jewish or encampment. So it was something that was very, very real and very serious. And now let's take a look.
Today, if you find a location that has 2 dishwashers, it was a Jewish.
You're right. Archaeologists, I always wonder about archaeologists in the 500 years from now. What are they or 1,000 years from now? What are they gonna know about? They'll find a blech. They'll know that they were Shomer Shabbos, and if they find there's many interesting things.
Well, you had the archaeological site in England where from the bones, they saw that there must have been a Jewish community because there's everything only of kosher animals in a certain section.
Yep. Yes, indeed. All right, let's take a look a little more Gemara. So now we spoke about wagons. Now we're going to be quoting another part of the Mishnah, Maseches Kelim, that talks about boxes or chests. There's 3 types of chests. By the way, if this looks at all familiar, if you look in the back of the Chabad Siddur, there's 3 chapters of Mishnayos that could be studied by a person that's in Avelis. And it concludes with a Mishnah that says, right? You've heard the rabbis. So that is in the final chapter of those 3 chapters. Those Mishnayos are from Kelim and Mikvos, the chapters that talk about ritual purity. And so this can be found in the back of the Chabad Siddur in one of those 3 chapters. Teva, and it's universally found in the book called Mishnayos. Shalosh Teva is saying there are 3 types of chests. Teva shepischa mitzida. You have a chest that has the opening on its side. Tmei midras, and this is susceptible even to the ritual impurity imparted by a zav or a nida, or possibly by treading, even indirect contact. Milamayla, if the box is open from on top. Tmei tmemes. We'll read Rashi's and see some explanation. It is susceptible to all impurities with the exception of midras. V'haba b'mida. But if it's massive, it's very large. Tahir miklum, it is entirely tahar. It cannot become ritually impure. And this, by the way, also came up earlier on in our Gemara. Teva shepischa mitzidot me'amidras. What is the function of a box that has its opening on the side? Not a box, a chest, I'm sorry. Well, a person could use it to sit or lie. Lefisha mishameshes shechiva imulachta shemishtamshem aderech pischa ein sarich leimar lishchei v'aleha amod v'nasa malachtenu. Amod v'nasa malachtenu. A person could possibly use it to sit on it, to rest on it, because it's open on the side, the top is solid. But if it opens on top, Rashi says something very interesting. It's like the things that we use. Our boxes open from the top. If a corpse comes in contact with the box, it becomes a conduit for ritual impurity. Just like every other vessel that is susceptible to ritual impurity. If it was under the same overhang, the same roofing as a mess, it becomes avatuma. And all other tumas would cause this box to become a first degree ritual impurity. But it's only not susceptible to treading, because it's not meant for human enjoyment, for lying or sitting on it. Person has to be told to get up. Okay, so this is a long Rashi, but we'll stick to the first half, which is Habab Amida, Teva Gedola Shena Metaltelas, a very, very large chest, a very large box that can't be carried. And there's a window, an opening on top or above to use it. It is entirely ritually pure. Rashi. Number one, it's not worthy. It can't be used as a bed because it's got a hole on top. And it's not susceptible to other impurities because it's not transportable when it's full. And as we learned recently, a sack is carried while empty and full. And to be made out of wood, it can only be ritually impure if it's also carried. This is a massive, massive box. It's not carried at all. Very interesting. Rashi says, how do you know? What is this word? Habab Amida. What does that mean that it's massive? How do I infer that it's massive? And so he says that in the Torah, the spies describe the people of the land of Israel. And what do they say? How do they describe these giants? So use the word Anshe Midos. They are massive people. They're measured. Our measuring sticks run out many times over. Our tape measures don't reach the top. They're very, very big. And so here, Habab Amida, it's got a great measurement. It tells us they're very large. So
Rabbi,
this is yes, Rabbi Beryl.
I'm surprised that nobody makes the opposite argument. What about a small chest that you couldn't do any of this?
How do you know no one makes the argument?
Not yet.
I'm not saying they do. I'm just asking how you know. Let's, for argument's sake, this is not going to answer your question, Rabbi, but let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz explains this. The Mishnah, so the Gemara now quotes a second Mishnah about the laws of impurity. 3 types of chests. One that opens on the side so you can sit and lie on it. It could become ritually impure with a zav. Even if one needs to open the chest, the person keeps sitting on it. You can use it while it is still, you can sit on top of it and open and close it. The chest that opens from the top cannot become ritually impure from treading because it is not opened with somebody on it. You cannot, the person has to get off. So its primary function is not a furniture for a human being. However, it can become impure by a corpse and a chest that's very large. What is very large? It can hold more than 40 saw. You know where this came in? It came in at a certain size, a box can be considered its own domain, if you recall. All right. Now we're going to do a little bit more, and it's going to talk about, we're going to talk about boats again. What time is it? We have a little more time. Okay, good. Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught, Midras Kli Cheres Tahar. an earthenware vessel is pure and not susceptible to midras. Rashi, midras klicher star im yashav alav hazav v'leinaga ba'avira. If a zav just sat on it without touching or entering any part of his body or something that comes from him into the airspace, tahar, the enimitam mishum midras, it does not get contaminated by midras. The Gemara is going to discuss later. Rabbi Yossi adds, you know what? A boat too. A boat too. The Gemara wants to know what he's saying. Micah Omar. What's being said here? Rashi. Ma'in sfina esel midras. How do you utter the word boat in the context of susceptibility to ritual impurity by a zav called midras? Rashi. Svina tahira afmitumas magal midras lechazia. A boat is super immune from impurity. A boat can totally not become impure. So what are you talking about boats? Amar Rav Zvid Hachikam. Rav Zvid explains this is what we mean to say. Midras knicheres tar. If you tread upon an earthenware vessel without a more immediate contact, it's ritually pure. But when you touch it, it becomes ritually impure. But if the boat is made out of earthenware, so af svina, a boat made of earthenware is also ritually impure. And this is reminiscent of the teaching that we just discussed in the beginning of today's session of Chananya, that a boat that is not like a sack, it's made of earthenware, can become ritually impure. Rashi, Chananya, the Yolav Tama Misak, the Cheres Le Iskash Lesak. Because Chananya is the one who says that a boat purity law is inferred from a sack. And if it's earthenware, it's not comparable to a sack and is more susceptible to ritual impurity. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi would disagree and say, no, boats are, I'm sorry, no. Rabbi Yossi says, no, all boats are ritually pure. So let's read this again. We're reading a brisa that talks about earthenware. Midras klicheres tar. A earthenware vessel is not susceptible to treading of a zav, but it is susceptible to the more traditional methods of conveying ritual impurity. And this would include a boat made of earthenware. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, afosfina, a boat is ritually pure because our Mishnah, if you recall, teaches us that all boats are pure. Bear with me just a little more. I know this is it might be a little bit of a confusing Gemara. Masculine or Papa has a problem here. Your interpretation, the way you've deciphered this brisa, could make sense on paper, but the word af here doesn't make sense. Even a boat. Rabbi Yossi is arguing and saying, no, a boat, even if it's earthenware, is not ritually impure according to this interpretation. And therefore, Papa is compelled to decipher this brisa differently than our Gemara, than Rav Zvid's initial interpretation. So again, we have a brisa that's a little bit obscure. It sounds like a riddle. Rav Zvid gives his interpretation. Rav Papa rejects his interpretation of this riddle-like brisa. Rav Papa deciphers the brisa that's talking about the laws of ritual purity and impurity of an earthenware vessel as follows. Midras klicheres tar. A zav who treads on a earthenware vessel but doesn't come into immediate traditional contact, it's ritually pure. But if you would touch it, it becomes impure. Mishal 8, a vessel made out of wood, it is super susceptible to all types of ritual impurity. And a boat that's small that traverses the Jordan, that would be ritually pure. All this, by the way, is not written. It has to be understood. You have to read between the lines. And Rabbi Yossi hears the comment, and he reads between the line, and he sees all of these statements, and he disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says, no. Af svina timeya. A boat is ritually impure because Rabbi Yossi must hold, like Hananya, who says a boat that's made of, a boat that's transportable is yet ritually susceptible to impurity. There's a problem with that statement, which is that that's not actually the words of the Brisa. But anyways, let's
A few lines above, it says, Rav Yossi says it's Sfinas is tahor.
correct. That's the question. So basically, Rav Zvid and Rav Papa both need to read the Brisa with fitting in a lot of missing lines of unspoken fact. And so these are like proposed. It's not a great example, but for example, scholars who work on manuscripts that have missing lines. So they publish the manuscripts. You know what they do? In brackets, they put what they imagine were likely the words that are missing. So here it's not quite that. Here I'm not saying that the Brisa is actually missing words, but the Brisa is coming with many, many, many assumptions. And at the time, in the context, you probably knew the assumptions. Now we're almost approaching these texts like scholars that are now to need to retro. How do you call it? We need to re-engineer the Brisa. And so Rav Zvid has his formula to say there must have been all of these assumptions laden in the single word. And Rav Yossi's comment about a boat was to make a counter point. And Rav Papa now wants to interpret it differently. That the Brisa starts off talking about klicheres. The Brisa understands, because everybody agrees, that wood has its own halacha. And also the Tanakam of the Brisa must have a position about a Sfinas Yardena boat, which he believes it's tar, because we know that's a Mishnaic opinion. And probably Rav Yossi is coming to disagree. But we need to read further, because at this point, Rav Yossi's interpretation sounds like it runs contrary to the very Brisa we read. Gemara says, hold on. Midras klicheres minol netara mechiskem rekrav ish asher mishkavei makesh mishkavei loy mahu islay tara b'mikvah af mishkavei nam islay tara b'mikvah. Okay, we have to do a little more research because you're asking a good question. Let's see Rabbi Steindaltz if he explains this. Oh, not a problem. I'm sorry, Dr. Stalin, not a problem. Let's read the Brisa again. Midras klicheres tar, a vessel that's a vessel made of earthenware is not susceptible to treading, the indirect contact. Rabbi Yossi says afsfin. Rabbi Yossi says, don't forget about the boat. What does Rabbi Yossi mean when he says boats too? Is he saying boats too that they have the same halacha, or is he saying that boats are different? So Rav Zid tries to say that Rabbi Yossi is saying that a boat is also ritually pure. And that would be reflective of our Brisa.
I think I get it. So actually, with at the above, when it starts, it should be really with a question mark. Rabbi Yossi Omer Afasfina with a question mark.
Possibly. So yeah, so basically they're both trying to reverse engineer and impose a perspective, but Rav Papa has a problem with this interpretation, because with all the words added in, now the word afasfina doesn't make sense. If you fill in all the blanks as Rav Zvid does, and so there's a whole dialogue about regular vessels and boats, and it's likely that the Tanakama wants to say a boat is no good, and Rav Yossi is coming to say a chiddush that a boat is tahar. But then the word afsfina wouldn't make sense, because really a boat is an exception to the earlier statements that are with the blanks filled in. So Rav Papa now revisits the Brisa, and he does his own engineering or reverse engineering of the Brisa. His version is that the Brisa is talking about earthenware, but the Brisa is also taking into account wood. And it says, so it's going back and forth. And a boat is tahar. And Rav Yossi says, no. A boat is tamei, just like earthenware. I believe that's the case. let's stop. Oh wow, it's 11 o'clock. It's 11 o'clock. All right, friends. So let's do a fast recap, just because today's Gemara was a little bit left field relative to our discussions of Masechah Shabbos, and even based on our earlier discussions about ritual impurity. So today we spent some time concluding the teachings about the value of being utterly devoted to Torah, because Hananiah's law, the law of the halacha that says that wood has to, for a wood vessel to be ritually impure, it has to be similar to a sack, and therefore boats that are very big are not susceptible to ritual impurity. Smaller boats are. That was a chiddush that was worth sticking around the base medrash. Then the Gemara introduced to us a question: a wooden vessel that's so heavy that a human being can't carry, it can only be pulled by animals. Is that considered transportable, carryable, and therefore ritually pure? And the Gemara says yes, and brought a Mishnah that talks about how wagons are susceptible to ritual impurity, even though they're quite heavy. Now that we introduced a Mishnah about wagons, we studied a Mishnah about boxes, and we were introduced to the fact that if a box or a vessel is good for human use, it is the most sensitive to ritual impurity. If it's only meant for wares, it is standard susceptible to ritual impurity. And a wooden vessel that's either so porous that it can't carry anything, or a wooden vessel that's so big that it can't be carried, that avoids, I'm sorry, I mixed in the next mission. A thing that's so big that you can't carry it avoids susceptibility to ritual impurity. Then we introduced another brisa on the subject that sounded a little obscure. It sounded like it was missing words. And we had two opinions of how to read the brisa. And that's where we ended off. Admittedly, a little bit of a different format and style than we are accustomed to. Tomorrow, Mirza Hashem, 2 or 3 more paragraphs, and we will be on to the next topic. So that is it. Thank you all for joining us today. I just want to mention all the names that we've been mentioning every day that we're davening for a refuah shlema. And I want to add a special tefillah, special dedication today for refuah shlema for Shmuel ben Sarah Perel. It's the father of someone who was close to the shul and comes around the batch, and he unfortunately had a brain aneurysm. Baruch Hashem, they stabilized him, and the procedures they tried went well, but he needs great miracles, and we'll pray that he should have such a refuah shlema, along with all the others that are in our dedications: Leah Basrita, Nisim Chaim ben Mazel, and Chaim Baruch Eliezer ben Rusa Esther, and prayers for good news for all of Klal Yisrael. I'm going to end the link in a moment and invite you to join the same link to study today's Chumash. Thank you for being on board today's Gemara session.
Yeshikach. Thank you.